Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today I review the Warhammer 40K novel, The High Kahl'S Oath, by author Gav Thorpe. As always with reviews, I will be discussing themes and narratives of the story, but avoiding what I feel would be any major story spoilers. And so without further ado, let's begin as usual by checking out the synopsis off the back of the book. The galactic core is beset by warp storms of a fury the Votann have not seen for 10 millennia. With both the Imperium of Man and the powers of the warp encroaching further and further onto the kin's territories, war reigns supreme amongst the core ward stars. Mirton Damagot, Hernkin prospect leader for the kindred of the Eternal Starforge, is in her element, exploiting the unending conflict and living a life of adventure without the unwanted burden of responsibility. But when a messenger from her kindred's holdship brings news that upends everything she knows, responsibility, challenges and opportunity come knocking. Mirton and her companions are plunged into a venture beyond their wildest expectations, and find themselves set against an ancient, deadly foe guarding a mysterious but magnificent prize. Okay, so here we are, our long-awaited first Leagues of Votann novel. First of all, I read the hardback as opposed to the audio version, so I most likely will pronounce words and names differently to what you may have heard. This is one I've really been looking forward to, that dive into the Votann faction, bringing them to life and really getting to know and understand them properly, laying out and seeing firsthand the civilization that was briefly explained within the Codex, how it works, how it functions, what the reality is like. It's been one we've been waiting for quite a while. And I'll say right from the off, this one succeeds on some of them things, but not so much on others for me. Now, Mirton Damagot is, as the synopsis stated, essentially the main character. She's a grizzled old prospect leader who's led her life out amongst the stars, leading her kin from one expedition to another. And the whole crux of this story is that life coming to an end, her being faced with having to assume a more weighty, static position of responsibility, in essence to truly lead and stop adventuring, to become more for her people. And this is an interesting dynamic, almost like an old general being recalled home from the front line. And the conflict within Mirton feels very real and understandable. And you can see how she uses situations presented as a way to postpone the inevitable, to have just that one more adventure. Because she knows what she has to do, what she needs to do, but it's all against everything she wants. And as anyone in that situation, she's very torn on what to do. Now, I say Mirton's essentially the main character, because though the story revolves around her, this one's very much an ensemble cast. Points of view constantly fluctuating between several characters. And you may expect me to not particularly like that, but actually it works here, with all the points of view largely remaining focused on Mirton's journey. For all the synopsis makes out that important enemy, there's not really one here, to be honest. They fulfill the functions they need to, and thus we don't waste time on their points of view, which is a good thing. Character-wise, we have the Iron King Lutar, her closest advisor and navigator, the Grimnir Yordaki, champion of the former High Kahl Dori, and representative of the Master Runewright Guild Lecky, along with a bunch of other minor characters that we see. They all feel unique and individual in their own right, and definitely bring a different perspective to the table. By far and away, my favourites were the champion Dori and guild representative Lecky. Now, it's not too much of a spoiler to say Dori is the only survivor of the tragedy that befell the former High Kahl, and so he brings the element of that grizzled veteran warrior. The dwarf fantasy flavour I was really hoping to see more of, really. There's a moment he's regaling his tale to a hall filled of his people, and it's everything I hope to see in a Votann novel. Vibes of the dwarfs of fantasy perfectly melded into the 40k universe, and it's a real standout scene for me. He's a very haunted character, locked on his oath, fulfilling the need to see it through, yet clearly also tormented by the events that have led him to it, the mental scars he has suffered. And then there's Lecky, as a representative of the guild, determined to have its payments fulfilled, and he brings another great flavour of the Votann people, the commercial aspect, and how if it's not taken seriously, it can lead to very dire consequences. There's a moment where Lecky is forced to take a strong position, what some may deem a drastic action, in order for the guild to get what's owed to them. And I absolutely loved it, with it really giving the Votann society an added element of intrigue, a dynamic that helps them really fit in well to the 40k universe we know, that it's not all sunshine and rainbows within the Leagues of Votann, that bit of possible internal strife and repercussion. However, unfortunately, after taking that action, he almost becomes portrayed as a bit of a villain for doing so, and even kind of comedically treated, which was a bit of a shame, as I love the serious dynamic he was displaying in Votann life. How guilds have real power, and how you have to pay what's owed, or else. Now, the other characters I didn't particularly dislike, but I never found myself particularly caring about them either. For example, Merton's relationship with the Ironkin advisor Lutar is a big piece of the narrative throughout. A lifelong companionship that definitely feels romantic in vibes at times, if emotionally and not physically. But it never really drew me in, and I would have rathered spending more time learning and seeing Votann life, and a bit less of Lutar worrying about how Merton's feeling, and vice versa. And admittedly, that's probably because of how I came into the novel. I wanted to see and learn everything about the Votann. Sure, I read the Codex when it came out, but I wanted to see and learn it all firsthand with them, experience Votann life. And of course I'm referring to the Leagues of Votann faction here, as opposed to the exact Votann themselves. And the moments where we really got to do that are the moments when it's at its best. There's a moment when they meet Imperials, welcoming them aboard their ship. And it's absolutely fantastic to see them struggling to interact through their evolved accent and language differences. Seeing the Votann perspective of the Imperium, the Mechanicus, even the symbol of the Aquila. The kind of thing we all want to know. And it leans into that fantasy dwarf element of hardy warriors, yet colourful and comical characters in those moments too, which is where the story shines for me, making me chuckle out loud at times. Again, in tone, you can see an almost lighter, Tolkien vibe to it. You even get a song in this one. And there's a moment in the ruins of a hold that felt straight out of Moria, so you can certainly see the inspiration. I'd say it feels more akin to a 40k novel you would have read in the late 90s, early 2000s. The early Uriel Ventris series, for example. A little lighter in tone than the setting has generally become. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Hobbit is one of my favourite novels of all time. It's just maybe a little different to what you may expect going in. Score-wise, for me, for the most part I enjoyed this one. It was a good, enjoyable enough adventure. One I would give 3 out of 5. A good, enjoyable read. The moments the Votann culture shine through, really showcasing their character, are absolute treats, leaning into that fantasy dwarf heritage. And I'd love to see more of that, and life amongst the holds and kin, flesh them out more. The negatives are I didn't feel that was consistent throughout, and I didn't particularly care for Merton or some of the other characters. It didn't get me emotionally invested in them. I enjoyed the adventure, but I didn't really care either way how it was going to end. I was also a bit disappointed that it didn't really lay out and explain the Leagues of Votann as if you were brand new, because that's what I was hoping for, waiting a long time since the Codex to really learn about them. Yes, you see and learn about the Leagues of Votann, but it felt more like it assumed you already knew of them and all the terminology, that you'd read the Codex, rather than explaining things naturally as you experience the journey, being equally readable for someone new to the lore, which was what I was hoping to get. Instead, I found myself wishing I had reread the Codex right before starting this. For example, it mentions the Trans-Hyperion Alliance, but it never really explains exactly what that is, what it means and how it affects everything. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because I hear from a lot of people that only read the novels and don't do the model and tabletop side of the hobby, or where novels are their introduction to move into the rest. If you're new to the lore, or you're trying to get a friend in, I definitely recommend reading their Codex first, before diving into this one. But overall, again, it's an enjoyable read. For me, a more interesting dive into the Votann than their first appearance in the Dawn of Fire series, and one where you can clearly feel the differences from their estranged Imperial cousins, as it were. Some real highlights at times showcasing the characteristics of the faction, but unfortunately a few central characters that just didn't draw me in to take it over the top. I don't want to sound too down on it, as I've given it the 3 out of 5 for a good fun read, but I guess we've been waiting for it for so long, I was just hoping for something a little more. The excitement's been building for a long time. But I enjoyed those highlights enough that it's definitely decided me on starting a Votann force someday. I've got the Dwarf Battalion box waiting for my Old World army, and I've now got to get some Votann for 40k. If you're interested in the Leagues of Votann, you'll enjoy this one, that is for sure. But as always everyone, what do you think? A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.